I married the wrong person and stayed too long. An American life story, as told by Robert Callahan, age 64, Dayton, Ohio, Part 1. The kitchen light. I wish I had said no. If I had opened my mouth and said that little word on a warm September evening in 1987, the next 30 years of my life might have been different. But I didn't. I smiled. I nodded. I told myself everything would be fine. And that quiet little lie became the foundation upon which I built my entire life. My name is Robert Callahan. I am 64 years old. I live alone in a 3-bedroom house on Maple Ridge Drive in Dayton, Ohio. I bought this house in 1989 with a woman named Diane, whom I believed at the time I would spend the rest of my life with. In a way, I was right. I spent a large part of my life with her. 31 years. One of the things I got wrong was assuming that sharing your life with someone is the same as living your life with someone. They are different things. I realize that now. Like most important things, I learned this too late, after the price had already been paid. The house is quiet these days. It's not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful, like a lake untouched at dawn. It's a different kind of quiet. The heavy kind. The kind that weighs on your chest as you lie in a bed made for two, but occupied by only one, at 4 in the morning. The kind that follows you from room to room like a dog that never leaves your side, but this dog gives you nothing. It gives no warmth. It gives no comfort. It only makes its presence felt. Most mornings I wake up at 5, not because I have somewhere to go. I retired from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, from civilian logistics after 37 years, but because my body has a memory my mind cannot erase. The early hours of decades have left their mark on me, like water wearing away stones. So I get up. I make coffee. I sit in the kitchen and listen to the house. The refrigerator hums. The clock in the hallway ticks. It's a brass and walnut clock that Diane's mother gave us as a wedding gift. I used to hate that clock. The sound of it used to drive me crazy during those long evenings when Diane and I had run out of things to say to each other, which was most evenings by the end. Now, the clock is the most reliable thing in my life. It doesn't ask me how I'm doing. It doesn't look at me with that expression. The one that says, I know you're not okay, but I don't want to get into it right now. It just ticks, steady, dependable, indifferent. There's a comfort in that. Outside the kitchen window, there's a bird feeder I hung last spring. I fill it every Tuesday. Cardinals come by in the mornings, sometimes a blue jay. I watch them eat. I drink my coffee. I think about things I shouldn't think about. That's the routine. That's the shape of my days now. Coffee, birds, regret, repeat. Diane moved to Columbus 3 years ago, after the divorce was finalized. She lives near our daughter, Christine, in one of those new townhouse developments with the stone facades and the little patches of grass they call yards. She looks good, better than she looked here. Our daughter sends me photos sometimes. Christine's kids at a birthday party, Christine and Diane at the farmer's market, Christine and Diane and the dog they got together, a golden retriever named Biscuit. In the photos, Diane is smiling. Not the smile I knew, the one that was more like a reflex, the muscles in her face doing what they were trained to do. This is a different smile, a real one. She looks lighter, like someone took a weight off her that she'd been carrying so long. She forgot it was there. I'm glad for her. I want to be clear about that. I am glad she found whatever it is she found over there in Columbus. But there's a part of me, the small, honest, ugly part that lives in the basement of who I am, that wonders why she couldn't find it here, with me, in this house, in this life we built together. And then the other part of me, the part that knows the truth, answers, because you were the weight, Robert. You were the thing she needed to put down. Christine calls on Sundays, sometimes, when she remembers, or when the kids aren't pulling her in 6 directions. I don't blame her for the gaps. She has her own life. She has a husband, Tom, who works in insurance and coaches Little League and seems like a genuinely decent man. They have 2 kids, Ellie, who is 7, and James, who is 4, and looks so much like my father that sometimes when Christine sends a video, I have to set the phone down and sit with that feeling for a while. She has what I wanted to have, what I thought I had, what I pretended to have for 31 years. I don't tell her that. There are things a father should not put on his daughter. The house has 3 bedrooms. One is mine. One used to be Christine's. It still has the lavender paint she chose when she was 13. though the color has faded to something closer to gray. The third bedroom was supposed to be for another child, the one we talked about having but never did. For a while it was a guest room. Then it became Diane's sewing room. Then it became the room where Diane slept, when she couldn't stand to be in the same bed with me anymore. We never talked about that transition. She just started sleeping in there, and I let her because by that point, we had both become experts at not talking about the things that mattered. It's November now. The trees on Maple Ridge have dropped most of their leaves. The ones that remain are the color of rust, hanging onto branches that have already given up on them. There's a metaphor in that, probably. I try not to think about metaphors. I try not to think about a lot of things. But this house, this quiet, empty, 3-bedroom house, doesn't give you much else to do. I went to Kroger yesterday. That's my big outing most weeks. I drive the same route I've driven for 35 years. Down Maple Ridge, left on Vine, past the Sunoco station where I used to get gas when it was 89 cents a gallon, past the library where Christine used to spend Saturday mornings. And I go to Kroger and I buy the same things: coffee, bread, eggs, lunch meat, a frozen dinner for nights when I can't be bothered to cook, which is most nights, bananas, because someone told me once that potassium is good for blood pressure, and my blood pressure has been high since 2011. The girl at the checkout, she's maybe 22, 23. She scans my items and she says, "Did you find everything okay?" And I say, "Yes, thank you." And that's it. That's the whole interaction. That's the most I'll talk to another human being today. Maybe tomorrow too. Maybe the day after that. I drove home. I put the groceries away. I sat in the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. A cardinal landed on the feeder outside the window and stayed for about 45 seconds, which is a long time for a cardinal. I thought, this is my life now. And then I thought, if only I had said no. That thought is a door. I try to keep it shut. But sometimes, especially in November, when the light goes thin and the afternoons get short, the door swings open on its own. And I'm standing there in 1987 again, 25 years old, looking at a woman I liked but didn't love, and saying yes when everything in me was whispering something else. The thing about regret is that it doesn't hit you all at once. It's not a car crash. It's a slow leak. A faucet dripping in a room you don't use. You don't notice it for years, and then one day you walk in and the floor is ruined, and you realize the damage has been happening all along, quietly, steadily, in the dark. That's what my marriage was, a slow leak, and by the time I noticed, the floor was gone. There is a box in the hallway closet on the top shelf, behind a stack of old tax returns. It's a shoe box, Nike, men's size 11, from sometime in the early 90s. Inside the box, there are photographs. Not the good ones. Those are in the album that Diane took with her to Columbus. These are the other ones, the ones that didn't make the cut, blurry shots, duplicates, photos where someone blinked or looked away. I keep them because they're the only honest pictures we ever took. The posed ones, the Christmas card photos, the vacation snapshots where we stood close and smiled. Those were performances. These are real. In these photos, you can see the distance. You can see two people standing next to each other who are not really together. You can see the truth. I pulled the box down last week. I don't know why. Maybe because it was raining and the house was even quieter than usual and I needed something to do with my hands. I sat on the hallway floor and I looked at those photographs one by one, and I tried to remember the man I was when they were taken. 30, 35, 40, 45. All those versions of me. All of them carrying the same quiet lie. All of them too afraid to say out loud what they already knew. There is a photograph near the bottom of the box. It's from a 4th of July picnic in 1994 at Miller Park. Christine is 3. She's sitting on a blanket eating watermelon, and her face is sticky, and she's squinting against the sun, and she's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Diane is behind her, kneeling, one hand on Christine's shoulder. I'm standing a few feet away holding a paper plate. We're all in the same frame, but I'm not in the picture. Not really. I'm already somewhere else. I'm already thinking about what it would feel like to be anywhere but here. I didn't know that then. Or maybe I did, and I just couldn't admit it. Either way, the evidence is right there, frozen in Kodak, undeniable. I put the photos back in the box. I put the box back on the shelf. I went to the kitchen. I made another cup of coffee. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. The cardinal did not come. That's what November does to you when you're 64 and alone. It pulls things out of closets. It opens doors you thought you'd locked. It sits you down in a kitchen that used to be full of noise. The clatter of dishes, the sound of the radio, Christine's laughter, the thump of her feet on the stairs. And it makes you listen to the silence. And in the silence, you hear everything you spent your whole life trying not to hear. If only I had said no. But I didn't. So let me tell you what happened instead. Part 2. The Choice. I met Diane Kowalski in the spring of 1986 at a church fundraiser in Centerville. She was 23. I was 24. She was standing behind a table of baked goods, wearing a yellow blouse and a denim skirt, and when I walked up, she smiled at me and said, "The brownies are better than the cookies, just so you know." I bought 2 brownies. She was right. They were better than the cookies. Diane was a pleasant woman. I want to say that clearly because what I'm about to tell you might make it sound like she was the problem. She wasn't. Diane was kind. She was organized. She kept a clean house. She remembered birthdays. She sent thank you cards. She volunteered at the church food pantry every other Saturday. And she never complained about it. She was the kind of person other people described as dependable and nice. And both of those things were true. She was dependable. She was nice. But there's a difference between someone being a good person and someone being the right person for you. I knew that difference. I felt it in my chest, in my gut, in the back of my skull, where the quiet thoughts live. I felt it the first time we held hands, walking through the Centerville Fair in August of '86, and I thought, this is fine, not this is wonderful, not this is everything I've been waiting for, just, this is fine, fine. That word, that small, dangerous, cowardly word, it's the word that builds prisons with no bars. You can walk into fine without noticing, and by the time you realize where you are, you've been there for years, and the door behind you has rusted shut. We dated for about a year. It was easy. That was the thing. It was easy. Diane didn't ask hard questions. She didn't push me to talk about things I didn't want to talk about. She didn't challenge me or frustrate me or keep me up at night wondering what she was thinking. She was steady, predictable, comfortable, and at 24, after a string of relationships that had been messy and intense and painful, comfortable felt like the answer. My mother loved her. That was a big part of it, if I'm being honest. And I'm trying to be honest now, even though it's 37 years too late. My mother, Gloria Callahan, was a woman who believed that life was a series of boxes you needed to check. Graduate high school, get a job, find a wife, buy a house, have children, go to church, mow the lawn. She had checked all her boxes, and she expected me to check mine. When I brought Diane home for dinner the first time, my mother looked at her and then looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that I had been waiting to see my entire life. Approval. She pulled me aside in the kitchen after dessert. "She's a good one, Robert," she said. "Don't mess this up." I didn't mess it up. I did something worse. I went along with it. My father, Harold, Hal, everyone called him, he was quieter about it. He was quiet about most things. He worked at the GM plant in Moraine for 34 years and came home every evening and sat in his recliner and watched the news and didn't say much. But one Sunday afternoon, a few months before I proposed to Diane, he and I were in the garage, and he was working on his truck, and he said, without looking at me, "You love this girl?" I said, "Yeah, Dad, I do." He kept working on the truck. Then he said, "There's different kinds of love, Robert." I waited for him to explain. He didn't. He just kept working. I stood there for a while, and then I went inside. And I never asked him what he meant. I think I knew what he meant. I just didn't want to hear it, because hearing it would have meant I had to do something about it, and doing something about it would have meant disappointing my mother. And disappointing my mother was a thing I had arranged my entire life around avoiding. There was a girl before Diane. Her name was Catherine Reeves. She went by Cat. We dated for most of my senior year in college, at Wright State. Cat was not comfortable. Cat was the opposite of comfortable. She was sharp and funny and unpredictable, and she had this way of looking at me like she could see through every wall I'd built. She scared me. Not in a bad way. In the way that matters. In the way that means something is real. When I was with Cat, I didn't know what was going to happen next. When I was with Diane, I always knew. Kat moved to Chicago after college. She wanted to work in journalism. She asked me to come with her. I said I couldn't. I had just gotten the job at Wright-Patterson, and my parents were here. And Ohio was what I knew. She cried. I stood there. She left. And the thing I learned about myself in that moment, the thing I have spent every year since trying to unlearn, is that when it comes to the choices that really matter, I am a man who stands still. So when Diane and I had been dating for a year, and everyone around us was getting engaged, and my mother was leaving bridal magazines on the kitchen counter, and Diane's friends were showing off their rings at every dinner party, I did what was expected. I went to Zales at the Dayton Mall. I picked out a ring, half-carat, princess cut. Nothing extravagant but respectable. I planned a dinner at the Olive Garden on Miller Lane because Diane liked the breadsticks. And on September 12, 1987, between the salad course and the chicken parmigiana, I got down on one knee and asked Diane Kowalski to be my wife. She said yes. She cried. The couple at the next table clapped. The waiter brought out a complimentary dessert, and somewhere in the back of my mind, in that place where the truth lives, even when you refuse to visit it, a voice said, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." I ignored it. I was good at that. We got married in June of 1988 at St. Christopher's Church in Centerville. It was a hot day. Diane looked beautiful in her dress, a traditional gown with lace sleeves that her mother had helped her pick out. My best man was my buddy Ray Watkins, who I'd known since high school. He clapped me on the back in the vestibule before the ceremony and said, "You ready, man?" I said, "As I'll ever be." He laughed. I laughed. We walked out to the altar. And when Diane came down the aisle and the organ played and everyone stood, I looked at her and I felt. What did I feel? I need to be honest about this. I felt warmth. I felt affection. I felt gratitude that this good, keen, dependable woman had chosen me. But I did not feel what I had felt when Kat Reeves put her hand on my face in the parking lot of her apartment building and said, "Come with me." I did not feel that electric, terrifying, alive thing. I felt comfortable. I felt safe. I felt fine. Fine. There it is again. We said our vows. I slid the ring onto her finger. We kissed. Everyone cheered. My mother was in the front row, crying happy tears, looking at me like I had finally done the thing she'd been waiting for. My father was beside her, smiling, but there was something in his eyes. Something quiet. Something he never said. We drove to the reception at the Knights of Columbus Hall, in a borrowed Lincoln Town car, with tin cans tied to the bumper. I remember the sound they made on the pavement. I remember Diane laughing and squeezing my hand. I remember thinking, this is it. This is your life now. Make it work. And I tried. God knows I tried. For 31 years, I tried. But here's the thing about trying to make something work when the foundation is wrong. You can patch the cracks. You can paint over the stains. You can rearrange the furniture so nobody sees the hole in the wall. But the foundation is still wrong. And eventually, not today, not tomorrow, but eventually, the whole thing settles. It shifts. It sinks. And you're left standing in a house that looks fine from the outside but is falling apart on the inside. And everyone says, "What a nice house." And you smile and say, "Thank you." And you don't tell them about the water in the basement. There were signs. Of course there were signs. There are always signs. We just choose not to read them. On our honeymoon, we went to Myrtle Beach, 3 nights, at a Holiday Inn that smelled like chlorine and carpet cleaner. I woke up in the middle of the second night, and Diane was asleep beside me. And I lay there in the dark and listened to her breathe. And I thought about Kat. I thought about what Kat was doing in Chicago. I wondered if she was happy. I wondered if she thought about me. That was the first red flag. The fact that I was on my honeymoon, lying next to my new wife, and my mind was in another state with another woman. I told myself it was normal. I told myself everyone has second thoughts. I told myself it would pass. It passed, and then it came back, and then it passed again, and then it came back again. And eventually it stopped passing and it just stayed, like a tenant who moves in for a week and never leaves. The first year of marriage was fine, there's that word. We settled into the house on Maple Ridge. Diane decorated. I fixed things. We had cookouts in the summer and watched football in the fall and went to her parents' house for Thanksgiving and my parents' house for Christmas. We had a rhythm. It was pleasant. It was normal. It was everything my mother had told me a good life looked like. But at night, after Diane fell asleep, I would lie in the dark and feel this space between us. Not physical. We were inches apart. Emotional. There was a wall there that I couldn't see, but I could feel. And I didn't know if I had built it, or she had built it, or if it had always been there. And we just built our life around it, like a house built around a boulder that nobody wanted to move. I should have said something in that first year when the patterns were still soft and new and could have been changed. I should have sat down with Diane at the kitchen table and said, I think we need to talk about something. I think there's a problem. I think I'm not feeling what I should be feeling. I think I married you for the wrong reasons and I'm scared and I don't know what to do. But I didn't say any of that because saying it would have meant everything I'd built was wrong. It would have meant my mother was wrong. It would have meant I had failed at the one thing I was supposed to do. Check the boxes, follow the plan, be a good man. So I stayed quiet. And the quiet became habit. And the habit became years. And the years became a life. And the life became this, a 64-year-old man sitting alone in a kitchen, listening to a clock tick, wishing he had said no when he had the chance. I think about that night at the Olive Garden sometimes. I think about what would have happened if I had ordered my chicken parmigiana and eaten my salad and driven Diane home and said, I care about you, but I don't think I can marry you. What would have happened? She would have been hurt. She would have cried. My mother would have been furious. People would have talked. But Diane would have found someone who loved her the way she deserved to be loved. And I might have found something too. Or I might not have. But at least I would have been honest. At least I would have given both of us a chance at something real. Instead, I chose safe. I chose comfortable. I chose fine. And fine, over 31 years, becomes something much worse than fine. It becomes a kind of erosion, a slow wearing away of the things that make you feel alive, until one day you look in the mirror and you don't recognize the man looking back, and you realize that the life you built wasn't a life at all. It was an arrangement, a deal you made with fear. My father died in 2003. Heart attack, at the breakfast table, halfway through a bowl of Cheerios. He was 71. At the funeral, my mother held my hand and said, he was a good man. And he was a good man. But I wondered, standing there in that cemetery with the wind blowing through the Ohio grass, if he had been happy, if he had checked all his boxes because he wanted to, or because he didn't know what else to do. I wondered if he lay in the dark at night and felt a wall he couldn't see. I never got to ask him. That's one of the smaller regrets. One of the many. I kept the ring I bought at Zales. After the divorce, Diane gave it back. She didn't throw it. She didn't make a scene. She set it on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker and said, I think this belongs to you now. I put it in the shoebox with the photographs. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is so quiet I can hear the blood moving in my ears, I take it out and hold it and think about how something so small can change the entire direction of a life. Half a carrot, princess cut, the price of a future I never should have built. Part 3. The cost. The years after the wedding settled into a pattern so steady you could set a clock by them. That's the thing about a marriage built on fine. It runs. The machinery works. The gears turn. There's no grinding, no smoke, no warning light on the dashboard. Everything operates exactly the way it's supposed to. And if you never look under the hood, you'd never know that the engine has no fire in it. We bought the house on Maple Ridge in 1989. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a detached garage, a yard with a chain-link fence, 1,200 square feet, $87,000, with a 30-year fixed mortgage at 9.2%, which was a decent rate at the time. I remember signing the papers at the title company downtown, sitting next to Diane, watching her careful handwriting move across page after page, and feeling, what? Pride maybe. The pride of a man who has done the expected thing. I had a wife. I had a house. I was 27 years old. I was on track. We painted the kitchen yellow because Diane said yellow was a happy color. We put up wallpaper in the dining room. Small blue flowers on a cream background. And Diane's father helped me install a ceiling fan in the living room that wobbled no matter how many times I balanced the blades. We had neighbors, the Hendersons on the left, the Murphys on the right. We went to block parties. We borrowed cups of sugar. We waved from driveways. We were the picture of normal. Christine was born in 1991, May 14th, at Miami Valley Hospital. At 3:17 in the morning, after 14 hours of labor, I was in the delivery room holding Diane's hand, and when Christine came into the world, red-faced and screaming, I felt something crack open inside me. That was real. That was not fine, that was enormous. That was the kind of love that knocks the wind out of you and rearranges every atom in your body. I looked at that tiny, furious face, and I thought, I will do anything for you. I will be anything for you. And I meant it. In that moment, I absolutely meant it. The problem is that anything is a promise made in a delivery room at 3 in the morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that, you still have to get up and go to work and come home to a marriage that doesn't fit, and the anything starts to shrink. It gets smaller every day, not because you love the child less, but because the life around the love is draining you, and you don't have as much to give as you thought you did. Christine was a beautiful baby. She had Diane's brown eyes and my mother's chin and this way of grabbing your finger with her whole fist that made you feel like you were the most important person in the world. For a while, a year, maybe 2, having a baby papered over the cracks in the marriage. We were busy. We were exhausted. We were focused on feedings and diapers and sleep schedules and pediatrician appointments. There wasn't time to think about the wall between us because we were too tired to think about anything. But babies grow up. They sleep through the night. They go to preschool. And then you're left with the silence again. Except now the silence has a third person in it. A little girl who deserves 2 parents who love each other, not 2 people who are just going through the motions. I want to be careful here. I'm not going to say Diane and I didn't have good moments. We did. There were Sunday mornings when Christine was small and we'd all pile into the bed together and read the funnies from the Dayton Daily News. And Christine would laugh at Garfield, even though she couldn't read yet, and those mornings were good. They were warm. They were close to what a family is supposed to feel like. And there were nights when Diane and I would sit on the back porch after Christine was asleep and drink iced tea and talk about nothing in particular, and it was pleasant, genuinely pleasant. But pleasant isn't love. Pleasant is the temperature of a room that's not too hot and not too cold. You can live in it, you can survive in it, but it doesn't warm you. It doesn't make you feel like you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And over time, pleasant starts to feel like a kind of punishment because you can feel in your bones that there's supposed to be something more, and the absence of that something becomes louder and louder until it's the only thing you can hear. The 90s were the decade of not talking about it. I went to work at Wright-Patterson. I drove the same route every morning, down Maple Ridge, left on Vine, onto Route 444, into the base. I sat in a gray office in a gray building, and I managed logistics for aircraft parts, and I ate lunch in the cafeteria, and I drove home. Every day, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year. I was good at my job, I was reliable, I was organized. I got raises, I got promotions. I got a plaque for 20 years of service that I hung in the den. My coworkers liked me. My boss respected me. From the outside, I was a success. Inside, I was disappearing. It happened slowly. That's the cruel part. It happens so slowly that you don't notice. It's like gaining weight. You don't wake up one morning and find yourself 30 pounds heavier. It's half a pound here, a pound there, and then one day your pants don't fit and you look in the mirror and you think, when did this happen? The conversations got shorter. That was the first thing I noticed, or maybe the first thing I allowed myself to notice. Diane and I used to talk at dinner about Christine, about work, about the news, about the Hendersons' new deck, about whether we should get a dog, and then, somewhere around 1996 or 1997, the conversations started to thin. We'd sit across from each other at the table, the same table we'd bought together at a furniture store on Wilmington Pike, and we'd eat and we'd say, "Pass the salt," and "This is good," and "Christine has a thing at school on Friday," and that was it. The words ran out like water from a well that's been tapped too long. I used to turn on the radio during dinner, not because I wanted to listen to music, but because the silence was so heavy that I needed something to fill it. Diane never said anything about it. She just ate and cleared the plates and went to the living room and turned on the television. I stayed in the kitchen. We were 20 feet apart, and we might as well have been in different cities. I remember a night. It must have been 1998 or 1999 because Christine was in second or third grade. When I was lying in bed and Diane was reading beside me, one of those Danielle Steele paperbacks she liked, and I turned to her and said, "Are you happy?" She lowered the book and looked at me. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you happy? With this, with us?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think so. Aren't you?" "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I think so." She went back to her book. I stared at the ceiling. Neither of us had told the truth. We both knew it. And neither of us said another word about it. Not that night. Not any night. We just kept going. That's what you do when you're in the middle of a life. You keep going. You get up. You make the coffee. You drive to work. You come home. You eat dinner. You turn on the radio. You go to bed. You do it all again tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. And you call it living because you don't know what else to call it. The vacations were the worst. That's when the pretending was hardest. Because vacations are supposed to be when you're your best self. When the stress falls away, and you remember why you chose each other. We went to Myrtle Beach twice more after the honeymoon. We went to Gatlinburg. We went to Put-in Bay. We drove to Washington, D.C. when Christine was 10, so she could see the Smithsonian. And every trip was the same. We'd pack the car and drive for hours and check into a hotel and go to restaurants and take pictures, and Diane would buy postcards and Christine would swim in the pool, and I would stand there in the middle of all this manufactured happiness and feel like I was watching someone else's life through a window. There's a photo from the DC trip that haunts me. We're standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial. Christine is between us, grinning, holding a little American flag she got from a street vendor. Diane has her arm around Christine. I have my arm around Diane. We look like a family. We look like the kind of family you'd see in a brochure for the American dream. And I remember the moment that photo was taken. A stranger offered to take it for us. And I remember thinking, if anyone saw this picture, they would think we are happy. They would think we have everything. And the distance between what this picture shows and what is actually true is the distance between who I am and who I pretend to be. And that distance is growing every day, and I don't know how to close it. But I smiled. I always smiled. There was a moment, one moment that I carry with me, that I turn over in my hands late at night like a stone, when I came close to telling the truth. It was the summer of 2002. Christine was 11. Diane and I had been married for 14 years. We were at a neighborhood cookout at the Hendersons' house, and everyone was in the backyard, and the charcoal was smoking, and the kids were running through the sprinkler, and someone had brought a cooler of Bud Light. I was standing by the fence with Ray Watkins, my old best man, and Ray had just gotten divorced from his wife, Karen, and he was telling me about it. He was telling me about the apartment he'd rented, a one-bedroom over on Smithville Road, and how it was small and empty, and he ate cereal for dinner most nights and watched SportsCenter until he fell asleep. "But you know what?" he said. He took a drink of his beer and looked at the sky. "I can breathe. For the first time in 12 years, I can actually breathe." I didn't say anything. I just stood there and felt those words settle into me like a stone dropping into deep water. I can breathe. That night, after the cookout, after Christine was in bed, I sat in the garage by myself with the light off, and I thought about Ray. I thought about that word. Breathe. I thought about what it would feel like to breathe, to be alone in a small apartment with nothing but a bed and a television and the silence that I chose instead of the silence that chose me. I thought about calling a lawyer. I thought about sitting Diane down and saying, "This isn't working. It hasn't been working for a long time. We need to talk." I sat in that garage for 2 hours. Then I went inside. I brushed my teeth. I got into bed. Diane was already asleep. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't say a word. I stayed for another 17 years. 17 years, do you know how long that is? It's Christine's entire adolescence. It's high school and college and her first job and her first apartment. It's my 40s and my 50s. It's the years when you're still young enough to start over, the years when you still have time. I spent those years in a house with a woman I didn't love, performing the role of a husband, like an actor in a play that never closes, smiling for photographs, attending parent-teacher conferences, mowing the lawn on Saturdays, going to church on Sundays, doing everything right except the one thing that mattered, being honest. The early 2000s were when Diane started sleeping in the other room. It wasn't sudden. It was gradual, like everything else in our marriage. First, it was just when she was reading late and didn't want to keep me up. Then it was when one of us was sick. Then it was when she had a headache. Then it was most nights. Then it was every night. The sewing room became her room, and my room became my room, and the door between us was always closed. I think she knew. I think she knew long before I had the courage to admit it. Women know. They feel the shift, the cooling, the way a man's eyes stop landing on them. Diane never confronted me about it. She never yelled, never cried, never threw anything. She just quietly, methodically, built a life within our life. Her friends, her volunteering, her book club, her relationship with Christine, that didn't include me. And I let her. Because her independence meant I didn't have to feel guilty. If she had her own life, then I wasn't depriving her of anything. That's what I told myself. But I was. I was depriving her of the truth. I was depriving her of the chance to find someone who would look at her the way I couldn't. Every year, I stayed. I stole a year from her. And from me, and from whatever life we might have had, if I'd been brave enough to walk through the door instead of just standing in front of it. The American dream. That's what they call it. The house, the spouse, the child, the job. The car in the driveway, the flag on the porch. I had all of it, every single piece. And it was hollow. It was a display model. It looked perfect from the curb, but if you walked inside and opened the closets and looked in the corners, you'd find dust and emptiness and the quiet desperation of two people who had built a life they didn't want because they were too afraid to build the life they did. If I could go back in time, and I know how foolish that sounds, how utterly useless it is to say, but if I could go back to any single moment, I wouldn't go back to the Olive Garden. I wouldn't go back to the engagement. I would go back to that night in the garage in 2002 when I was 40 years old and Ray Watkins had just told me he could breathe. I would go back to that moment, and instead of sitting in the dark for 2 hours and then going to bed, I would stand up. I would walk into the house. I would turn on the kitchen light, and I would say the thing I spent my whole life not saying. But I didn't, and the years kept coming, and the silence kept growing, and the house on Maple Ridge Drive kept standing, solid and respectable, and completely, utterly empty. There's a song by Bruce Springsteen, The River, that used to come on the radio when I was driving home from work in the late 90s. There's a line in it about a dream that doesn't come true, or worse, one that does. I'd hear that line, and my hands would tighten on the steering wheel, and I'd stare at the road ahead and think, he's talking about me. He wrote that song about men like me, men who got everything they were supposed to want and found out, too late, that wanting and needing are not the same thing. I'd pull into the driveway. I'd sit in the car for a minute, sometimes two. Then I'd go inside. "How was your day?" Diane would ask. "Fine," I'd say. "Fine." Christine graduated from high school in 2009. We threw her a party in the backyard. Diane made a cake, chocolate with vanilla frosting, Christine's favorite since she was 5. I grilled burgers. The neighbors came. Christine's friends came. She was happy. She was beautiful and young and full of the kind of hope that only exists when you haven't yet learned what compromise costs. I stood by the grill and I watched her and I thought, I hope you find someone who makes you feel alive. I hope you find someone who doesn't just fill a space in your life, but lights it up. I hope you're braver than I was. I hope you choose love over comfort, truth over peace, risk over safety. I never said any of that to her. I just flipped the burgers and smiled, and when someone asked me if I wanted another beer, I said, sure. She went to Ohio State. She studied education. She met Tom, her junior year. When she brought him home for Thanksgiving, I watched them together, the way he looked at her, the way she leaned into him, the way they had entire conversations with their eyes that no one else could hear. And I felt two things at once: joy that my daughter had found what I hadn't, and grief that I recognized so clearly the thing I'd been missing, because recognizing it meant I had always known what love was supposed to look like. I just hadn't had the courage to go find it. They got married in 2015. It was a beautiful wedding, small, outdoor, at a vineyard in Yellow Springs. Christine wore a simple white dress and wildflowers in her hair, and when she danced with Tom, everyone cried. Diane cried. I cried. But I think we were crying for different reasons. Diane was crying because her daughter was happy. I was crying because her happiness showed me, in the clearest possible light, everything I had missed. During the reception, I went to the parking lot and sat in my car, just for 5 minutes. I needed 5 minutes where I didn't have to pretend, where I could sit with the truth and let it sit with me. I leaned my head against the steering wheel, and I closed my eyes, and I thought about Kat Reeves, which is a terrible thing to think about at your daughter's wedding, but the heart doesn't follow rules. And when something breaks open inside you, the things that come out are not always the things you want. I went back to the reception. I danced with Christine. She put her head on my shoulder and she said, "I love you, Dad." And I said, "I love you too, sweetheart." And that was true. That was the truest thing in my life. Diane and I drove home together that night. We didn't talk. The radio was off. The road was dark. When we got home, she went to her room and I went to mine, and we closed our doors, and that was the end of the day our daughter got married. 2 years later, we filed for divorce. Christine was the one who brought it up, actually. She came to the house one Sunday. She and Tom were living in Columbus by then. And she sat at the kitchen table and she said, "Dad, Mom, I need to say something." Diane and I looked at her. "You're not happy," Christine said. "You haven't been happy for a long time. And I think you both know it. And I think you're staying together because of me, and I need you to stop." The room was very quiet. "I'm a grown woman," Christine said. "I'm married. I have my own life. You don't need to protect me from this. What I need is for you to stop pretending, because watching you pretend is harder than watching you apart." Diane started to cry. Not loud, just quietly, the way she did everything, tears running down her face, her hands folded in her lap. I sat there and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Not happiness, not freedom, just relief. The kind of relief you feel when a doctor finally tells you what's wrong after years of tests and uncertainty. The diagnosis hurts, but at least you know. At least you can stop pretending you're fine. "Okay," I said. That was all I said. "Okay." The divorce was finalized in 2019. It was amicable as divorces go. No fighting, no lawyers shouting. Just paperwork and signatures and the quiet dismantling of a 31-year arrangement that should have ended before it began. Diane got the car. I got the house. We split the savings. She moved to Columbus. I stayed on Maple Ridge. The night she left, I stood in the driveway and watched her car pull away. It was February. The air was cold and the sky was the color of slate, and her taillights got smaller and smaller until they disappeared around the corner on Vine Street. And I was alone. I went inside. The house was exactly the same as it had been 10 minutes earlier, but it felt different. The air had changed. The silence had a different texture. It was the silence of aftermath, of a thing that was over, of a space that had been emptied. I sat in the kitchen. I didn't turn on the light. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. And for the first time in 31 years, I didn't have to pretend. But the thing about pretending for that long is that when you stop, you don't feel free. You feel lost. You've been wearing a mask for so long that when you take it off, you don't recognize the face underneath. You've been playing a part for so long that when the show closes, you don't know who you are without the script. I sat in that dark kitchen for a long time, and I thought, now what? I still don't have an answer. Part 4. The realization. There's a moment that comes to every person who has wasted time, and I mean truly wasted it. Not in the small ways that everyone wastes time, not the afternoons spent watching television or the hours lost to idle scrolling, but the big waste, the foundational waste, the kind where you gave years of your life to something that wasn't real. There's a moment when the understanding hits you fully, completely, like a wave that's been building offshore and finally breaks over your head. You don't see it coming. You're just standing there doing something ordinary, and then suddenly you're underwater and you can't tell which way is up. Mine happened on a Tuesday morning in October of 2023. I was 62. I had been divorced for 4 years. I was standing in the bathroom shaving and I looked in the mirror and I did not recognize the man looking back at me. I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean I looked at my face, the loose skin under my jaw, the deep lines around my eyes, the gray hair that had thinned to almost nothing on top, the spots on my temples. And I thought, who is that? Where did that man come from? Because the last time I really looked at myself, I was 30, I was 40, I was someone who still had time, and now I was looking at someone who was running out of it, and between the man I was and the man I am, there was nothing. No great love, no great adventure, no story worth telling, just 30 years of going through the motions in a house on Maple Ridge Drive. And this face, this old face, was all I had to show for it. I set the razor down. I gripped the edges of the sink. I stared at that stranger in the mirror, and I felt something collapse inside me. Not dramatically, not a breakdown, not a sob, not a scene from a movie. Just a quiet internal buckling, like a shelf that's been holding too much weight finally giving way. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes. Then I finished shaving. I made my coffee. I sat in the kitchen. The clock ticked. But something had shifted. That morning, the understanding settled into my bones, and it has not left since. The understanding is this: I am 64 years old, and the best years of my life were spent living someone else's idea of a good life, and I cannot get them back. Not one day, not 1 hour, not one moment of the 31 years I gave to a marriage that was built on a lie I told myself in 1987. They say that time is the one thing you can't buy, and that's true. But what they don't tell you is that time is also the one thing you don't miss until you've spent it. When you're 30, time feels infinite. When you're 40, it feels abundant. When you're 50, it starts to feel finite. And when you're 64, sitting alone in a kitchen that was built for a family you no longer have, time feels like a resource you squandered without even realizing it. Like a man who inherited a fortune and spent it all on things that didn't matter. The people are gone. That's what gets me. Not the years. Years are abstract. But the people. The actual human beings who were part of my life and are no longer. My mother died in 2016. She had been in a nursing home for 3 years by then, the memory going first, then the body. The last time I visited her, she didn't know who I was. She looked at me with polite confusion, the way you look at a stranger who's walked into the wrong room. I sat beside her bed and held her hand and said, "It's Robert, Mom. It's your son." She smiled and said, "That's nice." Then she closed her eyes and went to sleep. She died 2 weeks later. I drove home from the funeral alone. Diane offered to come. We were still married then, technically. But I said no. I drove the hour and a half back to Dayton with the radio off and the windows up, and I didn't cry. I should have cried. I think something in me was already so closed off, so walled up, that the tears couldn't find a way out. They were trapped behind the same wall that had kept everything else trapped for 30 years. Ray Watkins moved to Florida in 2018. We were friends for 40 years, since Mrs. Palmer's sophomore English class at Centerville High. He was the first person I called when Christine was born. He was my best man at my wedding. He was the one who told me he could breathe. That night at the Hendersons' cookout, the night I almost changed my life. Ray's in Sarasota now. He married a woman named Linda, who we met at a bar, and they go fishing every morning at sunrise. And he sounds happy when I talk to him on the phone, which isn't often. He's busy. I'm not. That's the difference between a man who changed his life and a man who didn't. The man who changed his life has things to do. The man who didn't has a kitchen and a clock. I have other friends, or I had them. The list gets shorter every year. Dave Kohler, who I used to play poker with on Fridays. He moved to North Carolina to be near his grandkids. Steve Yankowski, who I used to watch Bengals games with. He had a stroke 2 years ago and doesn't go out much anymore. Mike Haas from the base. He died last March. Pancreatic cancer. I went to the funeral. It was at a church on West 3rd Street that I'd never been to before, and there were maybe 40 people there, and I sat in the back row and listened to people talk about what a good man Mike was, and I thought, someday there will be a room like this for me. And who will be in it? Christine, probably. Tom, maybe Ellie and James if they're old enough. Diane. Would Diane come? I don't know. And beyond that, who? Who remembers a man who spent his life being fine? Mike's funeral was the day I started thinking about memory. Not my memory, other people's. What they would remember about me, what I had left behind. And the answer, when I was honest with myself, was not much. I had a daughter who loved me but didn't really know me. I had an ex-wife who had spent 31 years beside me and could probably count on one hand the times I had been fully, authentically present. I had a house. I had a pension. I had a clock that ticked in an empty hallway. I don't want to be dramatic about this. I know that there are people who have suffered far more than I have. There are people who lost children, who lost everything, who faced real tragedy. My life was not a tragedy. It was something smaller and, in some ways, harder to name. It was a waste, a quiet, comfortable, respectable waste. And the thing about waste is that no one feels sorry for you, because from the outside you had everything. You had the house and the wife and the kid and the job and the car and the lawn and the flag on the porch. You had the American dream. And if you stand up and say, I had all of that and I was miserable, people look at you like you're ungrateful, like you don't know how good you had it. But having everything and feeling nothing is its own kind of poverty. I know that now. Christine's daughter Ellie turned 7 this year. Christine sent me a video of the birthday party. Ellie in a pink dress, blowing out candles, laughing with her friends. I watched that video 4 times. And on the 4th time, I noticed something. In the background, behind the cake, behind the balloons, Christine and Tom are standing next to each other, and Christine has her hand on Tom's arms, and they're looking at Ellie with the same expression, the same light in their eyes. And they're not performing, they're not pretending, they're just there, together, present, in the moment, in love. I put the phone down and I sat in the kitchen and the clock ticked, and I felt something open up inside me. Not the quick collapse of that morning in the bathroom, but a slower thing, a deeper thing, like a crack in the earth that has been growing for decades and finally reaches the surface. And through that crack came a grief so large and so old that I didn't know where it started or where it ended. Grief for the life I didn't live. Grief for the love I didn't chase. Grief for the man I might have been if I had been brave enough just once to say what was true. I don't cry often. I was raised by Harold Callahan, and Harold Callahan did not cry. But that night, I cried, sitting at the kitchen table alone, with the overhead light buzzing, and the clock ticking, and the November wind rattling the windows. I cried like a man who has been holding something for 37 years and finally lets it go. It didn't feel good. People say that crying is cathartic, that you feel better after. I didn't feel better. I felt empty. I felt like I'd been hollowed out by a spoon, like there was nothing left inside me but the memory of all the things I should have done and didn't. The birthday cards have slowed down. I noticed this last year. I used to get cards from a dozen people, old colleagues, neighbors, friends from church. Last year I got 4. This year I got 3. Christine, Diane, Ray, from Florida. That's it. 3 cards, 3 people who still think about me once a year. The phone doesn't ring much. I call Christine on Sundays, but half the time I get voicemail. I leave a message. Hey, sweetheart, just checking in. Give me a call when you get a chance. Sometimes she calls back that day. Sometimes it's Wednesday. Sometimes I don't hear from her until the following Sunday when I call again. I'm not angry about it. She has her life. She has children and a husband and a career and friends and all the things that fill a day until there's no room left. And the last thing she needs is her lonely father making her feel guilty. I know what it's like to have someone need you more than you can give. I did that to my mother. I did that to Diane. I don't want to do it to Christine. But the silence. The silence is the thing that gets you. Not the big silence. Not the silence of the house at night, which I've gotten used to, but the small silence. The silence of a phone that doesn't buzz. The silence of a mailbox that holds only bills and catalogs. The silence of an evening with no plans, no obligations, no one expecting you anywhere. The silence of being optional in everyone's life. There's a cemetery on Woodman Drive where my parents are buried, side by side, under a flat granite marker that says Callahan. I go there sometimes, not because I'm religious or because I think they can hear me, but because it's a place to go. I stand there and I look at their names and I think about my father's question in the garage. You love this girl. And I wonder what he would say if he could see me now. If he would be disappointed. If he would be sad, if he would just nod, because he already knew, because fathers know, because he asked the question not to hear my answer, but to hear me hear myself, and I failed that test. I bring flowers when I go, supermarket flowers, nothing fancy. I set them on the grave and I stand there for a while and then I drive home. Last time I went, it was raining. I sat in the car in the cemetery parking lot with the engine running and the wipers going, and I looked through the windshield at the rows of headstones stretching out across the grass, and I thought, Everyone here had a life. Everyone here made choices. Some of them made the right ones, some of them didn't, and now they're all in the same place, under the same rain, and it doesn't matter anymore which choices were right and which were wrong. Except, it does. It matters because of the living. It matters because somewhere in Columbus, Diane is having coffee with our daughter, and holding our granddaughter, and smiling that new smile, the real one, and she is living the life she should have been living all along. The life I kept her from for 31 years because I was too afraid to tell the truth. That's the cost. That's what I owe. Not money, not time, not some cosmic debt that can be calculated and repaid. I owe the truth. I owe it to Diane, who deserved a husband who loved her. I owe it to Christine, who deserved a father who was present. I owe it to Kat Reeves, wherever she is, who deserved a man who was brave enough to follow her. And I owe it to myself, the 25-year-old version of me who stood in a restaurant on Miller Lane and said yes when he should have said no. I owe all of them the life I didn't live, and I can't pay it back. That's the thing about this kind of debt. It's the kind that only grows. In the evenings, I turn on the television, not because I want to watch anything. I rarely pay attention to what's on. I turn it on because the sound fills the room. It makes the house feel less empty. It makes it feel like someone is here. A voice, a laugh track, the artificial warmth of other people's stories playing out in pixels on a screen. I sit in the recliner, the same recliner that was my father's, the one my mother gave me after he died. And I let the sound wash over me, and I pretend that this is okay. That this is just what life looks like at 64, that everyone ends up here eventually. But not everyone does. Some people end up in Sarasota, fishing at sunrise with someone they love. Some people end up in Columbus, smiling for real in photographs with their daughters and granddaughters. Some people end up anywhere but here, in a house on Maple Ridge Drive, with a clock and a television and a bird feeder and an old box of photographs on the top shelf of the hallway closet. Some people had the courage to choose. I didn't. And that's the thing I live with. That's the thing that sits at the kitchen table with me every morning and sleeps in the bed beside me every night. Not Diane, not anyone. Just the knowledge that I had a choice, and I chose wrong, and I stayed too long, and now the choosing is over, and the staying is all that's left. Part 5. The Lesson. I don't know who I'm talking to right now. Maybe no one. Maybe I'm just an old man in a kitchen, saying things out loud that he should have said 30 years ago, and the only audience is the clock, and the refrigerator, and the cardinal that comes to the feeder on Tuesday mornings. But if someone is listening, if there is a person out there who is standing where I stood in 1987, at the edge of a decision that will shape the rest of their life, then I want to say something. Not because I have wisdom. I don't think what I have qualifies as wisdom. Wisdom is what you get when you learn from your mistakes and change. What I have is something more like testimony. Evidence from a man who didn't learn, who didn't change, who took the safe road and ended up in a place that isn't safe at all. It's just lonely. Here's what I want to say. Don't marry someone because it's the next step. Don't marry someone because your mother approves, because your friends are getting engaged, because you're 25 and the world is telling you it's time. Don't marry someone because they're good. Good is not enough. Kind is not enough. Dependable is not enough. Those things matter. They matter enormously. But they are not the foundation. The foundation is something deeper. It's the thing you feel when you look at someone and the room gets quieter. It's the thing that makes you want to tell someone the worst thing about yourself and trust that they'll stay. It's the thing that makes you afraid, not because you might lose them, but because you know that if you do, a part of you will go with them. If you don't feel that, if what you feel is comfortable, if what you feel is fine, if what you feel is the absence of pain rather than the presence of joy, then stop, please. Stop and think about what you're building, because you're going to live in this thing for decades. And fine doesn't hold up over decades. It cracks, it crumbles, it leaves you sitting in a kitchen at 64, listening to a clock tick, wishing you'd been brave enough to say no. I'm not telling you to chase some fairy tale. I know love isn't like the movies. I know it's hard and messy, and sometimes it hurts, and sometimes you wonder if you made the right choice. I know all of that. But there's a difference between the doubt that comes from loving someone deeply and being afraid of how much you need them, and the doubt that comes from knowing, in the part of yourself you don't like to visit, that you're settling. The first kind of doubt means you're alive. The second kind means you're building on sand. I built on sand. And it took 31 years for the house to fall, but it fell. They always do. I want to say something about fear because fear is the real villain of my story, not Diane. Diane was just a good woman who crossed paths with a scared man, not my mother. My mother wanted the best for me, even if her version of the best was limited by her own experience. The villain was fear. The fear of being alone. The fear of disappointing people. The fear of making the wrong choice, which is ironic because the fear of making the wrong choice is what led me to make the wrong choice. Fear whispered in my ear at the Olive Garden. Fear stood beside me at the altar. Fear held me in that house for 3 decades, telling me that this was safer than the alternative, that stability was more important than honesty, that a quiet life was better than a risky one. Fear was wrong. Fear is always wrong when it tells you to stay small. I think about what I would tell my younger self, if I could. I think about what I would say to that 25-year-old kid sitting in a booth at the Olive Garden with a ring in his pocket and a knot in his stomach. I would say, put the ring back, drive her home, sit with the discomfort, let your mother be angry, let Diane be hurt, let the world think whatever it wants to think. Because the pain of disappointing people lasts for months. The pain of living a lie lasts for the rest of your life. And I know which one I'd choose now if I could choose again. But I can't choose again. That's the cruelest part of regret. It gives you perfect clarity about the past and no ability to change it. You can see exactly where you went wrong, exactly when you should have turned left instead of right, exactly which words you should have said. You can see all of it, with a sharpness that borders on cruelty. But you can't go back. You can only sit with the knowledge and let it teach you things you no longer need to know. There's a phrase people use, it's never too late. I've heard it from therapists, from self-help books, from well-meaning friends, and I want to believe it. I do. But I also think it's something we tell ourselves to feel better about the time we've lost. Because in some ways, it is too late. I am 64. My body aches in places it didn't used to. My knees hurt when it rains. My back stiffens if I sit too long. I have high blood pressure and the beginnings of arthritis, and I take 4 pills every morning that my father never needed. Because my father had the good sense to die quickly, at the breakfast table, before his body had time to fall apart in slow motion. I could meet someone. People tell me that. Christine tells me that. Dad, you should get out there. You should try one of those apps. And maybe she's right. Maybe there's a woman somewhere who would make the house on Maple Ridge feel less empty. Maybe there's a second chance waiting in some coffee shop, or book club, or church social, and all I have to do is show up. But the truth is, I'm tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that lives in your bones. The kind that comes from years of pretending, years of performing, years of being someone you're not. I don't have the energy for another performance, and I don't trust myself not to make the same mistake again, not to choose comfort over truth, not to say, fine, when I mean something else. I thought I would feel free after the divorce. I thought that was what freedom looked like. The empty house, the quiet mornings, the absence of pretending. But freedom, it turns out, is not the same thing as peace. Freedom is just the space where peace might grow, if you plant something in it. And I haven't planted anything. I've just been standing in the space, looking at the dirt, trying to remember how seeds work. Some nights I drive, not anywhere in particular, just around Dayton, down the streets I've known my whole life, past the high school where Ray Watkins and I used to smoke cigarettes behind the gymnasium, past the church where Diane and I got married, past the apartment building on Wayne Avenue where Kat Reeves lived for a summer before she moved to Chicago. Past the Olive Garden on Miller Lane, which closed a few years ago and is now a Buffalo Wild Wings. I drive past these places and I think about all the people I used to be. The kid, the student, the boyfriend, the husband, the father, the employee. And I try to figure out which one was the real one. Which one was me underneath all the roles and the expectations and the performances. And I think the answer is, I don't know. I never gave myself the chance to find out. I was too busy being what everyone else needed me to be. That's what I would say to anyone who's listening. Not follow your dreams or live your best life or any of those things that sound good on a bumper sticker but don't mean anything when you're standing in a kitchen at 5:30 in the morning with no one to talk to. What I would say is simpler than that. I would say, be honest. That's all. Just be honest. With yourself, with the people you love, with the people you might love. Tell the truth even when it's hard. Tell the truth even when it hurts. Tell the truth even when it means losing something you think you need. Because the things you lose by telling the truth are things you never really had. And the things you keep by lying, the comfortable marriage, the quiet house, the respectable life, those things will eat you alive from the inside, slowly, over decades, until there's nothing left but a man in a kitchen, talking to no one, wishing he had been brave. I think about Diane sometimes, not with longing. That would require a love that was never there, but with something like tenderness. He was a good woman who got a raw deal. She gave 31 years to a man who was pretending, and she deserved better. She deserves the life she has now in Columbus, with the real smile and the golden retriever and the townhouse with the stone facade. She deserves all of it. I hope she knows that. I hope she knows that the failure of our marriage was not her failure. It was mine. It was always mine. I think about Kat Reeves. I looked her up online a few years ago. I know. And she lives in Portland now. Oregon, not Maine. She's a journalist, just like she wanted to be. She has a website with her articles listed, and I read a few of them, and they were good, sharp, honest, full of the same fire she had at 22. She's married, she has 2 kids, she looks happy, and I closed the laptop and I sat there and I felt a strange peace. Not for me, for her. She got out, she went to Chicago, she built the life she wanted. She didn't let a scared man in Dayton, Ohio, hold her back. Good for you, Kat. I mean that. I think about Christine, my daughter, my one true thing, the person I love without condition, without pretense, without the taint of fear. I think about the night she was born, the way she grabbed my finger, the way I said I would do anything for her. And I think about all the ways I fell short of that promise. The evenings I was physically present but emotionally absent. The weekends I spent in the garage instead of on the floor playing with her. The years I modeled a marriage that taught her nothing about love. She turned out okay despite me, not because of me. That's a hard thing to admit. But it's true. Last Sunday, she called. Not voicemail. She actually picked up. We talked for 20 minutes. She told me about Ellie's school play and James's obsession with dinosaurs and the new restaurant she and Tom tried. She sounded happy. She sounded full. And at the end of the call, she said, "I love you, Dad. Talk to you next week." I said, "I love you too." And I sat in the kitchen and I held the phone and I listened to the silence that came after. And it was a different kind of silence. Not the heavy kind, not the pressing kind. Something lighter, something closer to, I don't know, acceptance maybe. Not peace. I don't think I've earned peace. But acceptance. An acknowledgement that this is where I am and I got here through my own choices. And the only thing I can do now is tell the truth about it. The clock ticks. The refrigerator hums. The cardinal hasn't come today, but it's early yet. The coffee is hot. The house is quiet. This is my life, not the one I wanted, not the one I should have had, but the one I chose, through 1,000 small acts of cowardice that I mistook for prudence, through 31 years of fine that were anything but. I set the coffee cup down. I look out the window. The November light is thin, the color of old paper, and the trees on Maple Ridge are almost bare. There's nothing beautiful about it. But it's real. It's honest. And after 64 years, honest is all I have left. I hope it's enough. I don't think it is, but I hope. That's the last thing fear gives you when it's done with everything else. A small, fragile hope that you haven't used the whole thing up. That there's still something left. That the story isn't over, even though the best chapters are behind you. I get up from the table. I rinse the cup. I put it in the rack. I stand at the sink, and I look out at the yard, at the fence, at the feeder, at the sky. The house is quiet, but it's mine. And for the first time, I'm not pretending it's something it's not. I just wish I hadn't waited so long to stop pretending. N.